Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Chess, drafts, Monopoly and backgammon. We may instantly recognise these as board games, even though we may not necessarily know how to play. What about the pink map? Have you heard about that? It's all about strategy, moves and counter moves, anticipating your opponent's actions, calling their bluff and plotting out your endgame by thinking several moves ahead. Board games are full of tactics, positional analysis, strategy and endgame technique, and the pink map was no exception to this. It was part of a wider process which had to be the greatest board game ever played, that of the colonial narrative promoting the idea of discovery as a basis for laying claim to ownership of land and resources that were already known and utilised by the indigenous populations. This narrative played out across the African continent through European expansion, from settling into ports along the coasts, exploration into Africa's interior, establishing treaties with the indigenous tribes, and the so-called discovery of natural resources. This narrative culminated in 1884, when the nations of Europe convened to play this board game. The objective was to discuss and to answer the Africa question. Though the players worked collectively as a team, they were also each other's opponents. Austria, Hungary, Denmark, France, Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Germany and America thrown in with them, with the then First Chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, presiding. So what were the phases of this board game? The opener was Henry Morton Stanley's charting of the river through the Congo Basin. The middle game lay in Articles 34 and 35, where each of the players had to establish proof of occupation through treaties, armies, police forces and administrative processes, and the end game to eliminate all forms of indigenous autonomy and self-governance, and to minimise the influence of minor powers that would be a threat to European diplomacy. This board game was officially called the General Act of the Berlin Conference, more commonly known as the Scramble for Africa. In 1884, the legacy of the slave trade was not one, but several profitable triangles which spanned across 4 continents. Slavery not only fueled the Industrial Revolution, developing the ports of Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow and London, but also enabled Britain to establish its legislative and sovereign influence across a quarter of the globe, and through this it was able to build wealth like no other nation in Europe or in the world. It is ironic that 50 years after Britain had abolished slavery across its empire to free the enslaved, it now worked with other European powers to take possession of their lands. This board game presented a paradox in that it replaced one form of exploitation with that of another. But what about the pink map? It was another board game within this board game. It was a concept inspired in 1885 by Portugal's then Foreign Minister Barros Gomes, attempting to make a formal claim to the land that stretched like a corridor between their own newly claimed discoveries of Angola and Mozambique. A corridor known today as Zambia, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. The pink map was a request for Britain to relinquish its own claim to this same stretch of land and to convince other European nations of Portugal's claim. It did nothing to achieve either of these objectives. So what brought on this dispute between Britain and Portugal, and how did the game play out? During the early 1800s, British contact with Africa was limited but began to extend beyond the coast of Cape Town, which it had seized from the Dutch from around 1815. Britain had also secured Sierra Leone and was engaging in ongoing conflict with the Ashantis in Western Africa. Portugal's control of Angola and Mozambique was also limited to trading posts along the coasts at this time, even though their exploration of Africa's interior went as far back as the 1600s, transporting slaves to Brazil and Mauritius. By 1853, Portugal began its manoeuvres in defence of this corridor of land through military campaigns in an attempt to claim Zambezi Valley and parts of southern Malawi. These manoeuvres also included explorers such as Alexandre de Serpa Pinto, along with Antonio Cardoso, who between them in 1869, 1876 and 1877-79 travelled across Angola, Upper Zambezi and also through the Congo. Lands across the corridor were also commissioned by André de Carvalho of the Geographical Commission of the Portuguese Ministry of Marines. Joaquim Carlos Palva de Andrada succeeded in establishing administrative posts in Mozambique and the Manicaland province of Zimbabwe. This enabled Portugal to attempt to make a claim to the southeastern Malawian border, asking Britain to accept this territorial claim. Britain countered Portugal's claim through key figures such as David Livingstone establishing missionary posts in southern parts of Malawi from around the 1860s and 1870s. This was reinforced with the African Lakes Company being established in 1878 in line with Presbyterian values to set up trading interests that would help to phase out the slave trade. Henry O'Neill and the British Prime Minister at that time, Lord Salisbury, announced another board game to use the corridor of land for their own concept of linking up their claim of land stretching from the north to the south of the entire African continent, calling it the Cape to Cairo route. And then there was Cecil Rhodes, who set up the South African Company in 1888 and went on to establish diamond mining in South Africa. Although a treaty saw Britain willing to grant Portugal a link along the Zambezi by road, rail and telegraph line, it conceded no boundaries to land occupation. Portugal responded through military occupation of Manicaland, an eastern province in Zimbabwe which shared its border with Mozambique. Portugal's strategy was to occupy this land and push its way into Zimbabwe and across the corridor of land towards Angola, but here is where the game reaches its climax. On the 1st of November 1890, Britain gave an ultimatum demanding the withdrawal of Portugal's army from the region, and by the 11th of June 1891, Portugal relinquished claims to Manicaland in favour of gaining more territory in the Zambezi Valley. They could navigate on the Zambezi and Shire rivers, but with no special rights along the north bank. This ended Portugal's aspirations, and Manicaland was awarded to Britain, ending the dispute and completing the end game. If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform and check out my other podcast episodes related to this one, such as the original episode that this reprisal is based on, the Pink Map Project, The Ultimate Paradox, from the first season. And why not check out the reprisal series from this season, Windrush 75 and Constantinople 1453, and also their original episodes back in the first season, HM Windrush, A Different Perspective, and Constantinople 1453, A Catalyst for European Change. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Nights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change, are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats and in ebook format on Apple Books. Also, the publication of the latest 4 titles. If you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. Visit the website Stories to be Told for my latest newsletter and promotional giveaway, which is in the month of August, for one lucky person on our email list. Now, if you'd like to be registered on my email list, visit the website and sign up, where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles, but also it's an opportunity to enter the draw for a monthly giveaway. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next page.